HiRez is in a bit of trouble. And you may be wondering, what have they done this time? And in fact, they've done absolutely nothing. They haven't done anything wrong at all, and still they are in trouble. Why is that? Because somebody else has done something. And I know I'm a little bit late to the party here. This happened a few days ago already. I didn't actually get around to covering it then, but I still wanted to talk about it. And I'm assuming, boldly assuming, that most of you didn't look into it all too deeply at least. Because what was announced was Riot's upcoming games, Riot being the company behind League of Legends. And I know most Smite players have a little bit of a grudge against League of Legends. So I'm guessing that at least some of this will be in use to most of you. If I'm completely off, sorry about that. So what was announced and why is this relevant for HiRez at all? Well, at the moment, League of Legends is basically the biggest thing that Riot Games does. They have their own little turn-based spin-off of the auto chess genre, being Teamfight Tactics as well, which is still in the same universe. And as far as I'm aware, it's even in the same launcher at this point still. So it really isn't that separated from League of Legends in itself. It's more of an addition to it. Riot Games even classifies it as a different mode. So really they have one big game with an add-on or something. And they announced a bunch of games at the same time. They announced Legends of Runeterra, Project A, Project L, Project F, Teamfight Tactics coming to mobile, League of Legends Wild Rift, and a League of Legends esports manager apparently as well. But what does that have to do with HiRez? Well, it has a lot to do with the games behind the project names especially, but we'll get to that. First we have to quickly look at what games HiRez currently has and where they're really standing. So HiRez, older games that are no longer really maintained don't really matter here. Tribes Ascent, Global Agenda, those aren't really actively played by many people to the point that they have any relevancy for HiRez. They're not profitable. The games that are profitable primarily are Smite and most likely Paladins as well. Both have fluctuating player bases but still stable player bases, especially on console, and they are the money makers for HiRez. In addition to that, there is also Realm Royale, which I don't really know where it stands right now, but it still is at relatively low numbers compared to the other games. It picked up a little bit on console, but I don't think that HiRez would be able to survive as a company based on Realm Royale. It's gotta be realistic here. So what's keeping HiRez in business is Smite and Paladins. They have a new game planned though, which is called Rogue Company. We don't know that much about Rogue Company yet. There was supposed to be additional information in October apparently. At some point some parts of the website said there would be new info in October. Now it just says new info coming soon. So we don't really have that many details, and I could imagine that this coming soon instead of October might also be related to the announcement by Riot, because that kind of may have shifted their plans a little bit. But I'm guessing we'll still hear something at HRX. So Rogue Company is a team-based, character-based, third-person shooter. So you have guns and you have abilities, I guess in a way somewhat similar to Paladins in that regard at least, but visually a lot more realistic with more people-like characters, and also a bit of a different style due to the fact that it's third person. And the initial announcement on HiRez page also says that players will grab their weapon of choice. So it seems while this is kind of class-based or character-based, you will be able to pick different weapons, choose different weapons, maybe a bit more like CSGO in that regard at least, instead of being locked to your weapon like you're on Paladins. So overall a bit more of a weapon-focused game as well. And while I initially didn't quite get what niche Rogue Company is supposed to fit in, it became clear to me over time that the main purpose here is really just to release a free-to-play shooter. Because the majority of shooters out there, no matter how popular they are, still cost at least a little bit of money or are sometimes just very indie style overall. And Rogue Company could kind of fall in a niche in between, where you have a somewhat bigger publisher that's able to put out a game where you can still have your normal shooter mechanics while also just being able to play it free to play. And yeah, there's not too many of them. We also know that at least in the early days, HiRez was heavily pushing towards shooters. I think it's HiRez who really likes shooters, so that may have something to do with the choice here as well. So technically speaking, potential for that game was there. There's technically speaking also potential for Realm Royale to somehow come back one day, but I don't think it's really going to happen based on the fact that the Battle Royale market is fluctuating so quickly and it's already kind of, I don't know, fading out. At least Fortnite is. Apex picked up a bit, but it's also kind of fading out again. So I don't really see that being a sudden discovery again of Realm Royale, which many people already hate because of the initial changes. And that brings us to the first game that was announced by Riot Games here. This game is Project A, also going under the codename Ares. This game is designed as a shooter. It is not third person, it is first person, so that's maybe the key difference here. And it's supposed to be somewhat of a bridge between CSGO and Overwatch, or CSGO and Paladins. An aim-heavy shooter that apparently also allows you to buy weapons at the start of the game, similar to CSGO, but at the same time also a shooter where you can use abilities. One of the developers describes the game as Project A is a tactical FPS with characters and abilities that augment gunplay. This person is Sal Garozzo, who is the maker of a very, very popular map for CSGO, DE Cache, and this is considered one of the best CSGO custom maps. And he also wrote an article a long time ago on improvements to broadcasts of CSGO games and how the viewing experience could be better, that heavily influenced how we are watching CSGO today and is by some people credited as a big reason or a part of the reason why CSGO as an esports is so successful now. Along with that, Riot also announced that the game will have a very heavy emphasis on a stable netcode and heavy anti-cheating policy, though those things are a bit subjective, I guess, and really depend on if they execute it that way or if it's just something they say at the start. We'll get more infos in 2020, but Riot makes it very, very clear that they are setting this up to be a big competitive shooter that will most likely have the aim of having a large esports scene along with it. And knowing Riot, this game is going to be free as well, and you make the money through cosmetics. And that sounds pretty problematic for HiRez in my opinion. This game sounds like it's A, kind of trying to nip some of the players from Paladins, and B, like it will be a very close competition to Rogue Company, with the only difference being the third person thing here. And I'll be honest, I think most shooters are more accessible if they're first person because that's what more players are used to. And with the following and the money that Riot has through League of Legends and apparently the amount of time that they've spent developing this has apparently been in the works for years, this sounds like HiRez should at least be concerned about it. But don't take it from me, take it from the experts. Slasher, esports journalist, has said the following. Riot has had several current and former pro Counter-Strike players and former pro Overwatch players try out and playtest Project Ares over the past year, which has been in development for several years, sources said. They have all given it near unanimous praise. Kolocki, general manager for United, who also was heavily involved with Enemy back in the day and kind of started his career to Smite, also expect various pros from other games to move over to Project A once it releases, just because there's so much potential to reach new heights in that game basically, because the game will likely be very, very popular and get a lot of support. Of course, HiRez is not the only one who has to worry here, especially Blizzard, who have problems with their reputations at the moment anyways, are of course in trouble with Overwatch numbers already falling, and then another game like that coming in. That's gonna grab a lot of players from there as well. But what does that have to do with Smite? Why would Smite be in trouble as well, or what issue would Smite have when this is a shooter? Well, that wasn't the only announcement. The other announcement was League of Legends Wild Rift. And League of Legends Wild Rift is basically a redesigned version of the normal League of Legends game that makes it shorter. And that changes some things about the gameplay pacing, like for example, I think it's less minions, and then I guess you get some more XP, some faster leveling and everything. So anything that will allow you to accelerate the map without making it wildly different in design. So League of Legends players would still be familiar with how things go in general. What's the purpose of this game? To release it on console and mobile. And the alpha and public beta testing for that is starting as early as 2019 in some countries and 2020 everywhere. Now, releasing a game on mobile and console but excluding PC may sound like a strange choice at first, but it makes sense from the perspective that League of Legends was never really a graphics-heavy game, so the visuals don't matter all that much between console, mobile, or PC, and it's more about the controls being fair and the inputs being comparable. We can see the touchscreen controls for the mobile version here. Unfortunately, there's no console footage here, but I would imagine the controls are quite similar to Smite. Is this really relevant for Smite? I don't think it's as relevant as Project Ares is for Paladins or for Rogue Company, but I do think it's still relevant. And that is because so far, Smite has simply been without a big competitor in the console scene. The biggest player base of Smite at this point is most certainly at console. I made a poll for that a long time ago, and keep in mind my channel is basically still PC Smite based to some extent and started with only PC players. And even there, the player pool of console players was much bigger already, and that was before the Switch, so now you add in the Switch players and factor in that the UI nowadays is completely only designed for console and PC is kind of a second thought in all regards. It's very clear that the bigger player base sits on console already. And it sat comfortably there. There was not really any big competition. There were some smaller MOBAs popping up here and there, but none of them were really good enough or really well designed enough or from a big enough brand to compete. I don't think that will be the case for League of Legends Wild Rift, because that is a well-established brand and they know how to do MOBAs and they're very successful doing so. Also consider the fact that the games are designed to be shorter. We are in Generation Fortnite now. Most people want their games to be relatively short so they can jump into the next one if things don't go too well. And especially in the MOBA genre, the frustration of having to sit through a long bad game is very much there. Even now in Smite, a lot of people prefer shorter game modes like Arena or like Joust over Conquest. And what if those people feel like they might actually be able to play the real MOBA mode, so to speak, without having to invest that extra time for it on another game? I don't know to what extent it's going to drive away existing players on Smite console, because I think a lot of them value the things like third person or the controls that come with that, and they might not be willing to switch, but I think it's going to lure a lot of new players to League of Legends before they go to Smite, much like it is the case in the PC world as well, and I think that's part of the reason why Smite's PC numbers aren't doing too hot compared to the console numbers. Now, I have no metrics on how much Smite is still growing in the console scene at the moment, but still, any hindering of growth or growth that's going elsewhere will definitely have an impact on the player base. Especially when those players can also play on mobile that way. I know of quite a few people that got back into Smite because they could play it on the Switch, they could play it on their console while they're not at home, while they're not using their big monitor, and instead just to carry the Switch around because of the convenience of it. Now you could do the same thing with your phone with League of Legends Wild Rift, and you can probably link your accounts between the console and the phone, so you can play some whatever at school on the bus, and then you play some more at home on your console. And different from Smite, you don't even need a Switch for that. So are those bad news for HiRez and bad news for us? It's obviously up to a personal perspective here. I personally think that it will be bad news for HiRez to some extent, and it should be a wake-up call for them. If they make the right decisions now, they make the right marketing steps and consider maybe also where they want to go with future games and how Rogue Company is going to set itself apart from other games, then it could be good for everyone, because then we might get better games all around. And realistically, nothing is stopping us from playing these other games as well. It's also a possibility that HiRez may remain relatively unaffected by this and just get lucky. The worst case scenario would probably be that HiRez doesn't concern themselves with this at all, but it actually has an impact on their games, and the player base shrinks in those games, making it harder to find good matches for everyone, which would then kind of snowball further because then people would leave because of that and so on. And playing in a region with a smaller player base, I can tell you that that definitely is an impact that you will feel at some point. So let's hope it doesn't come to that. For the sake of completion, let's also quickly mention the other games that Riot has announced, because that's very interesting, especially when we look at the perspective of not HiRez so much, but Blizzard, for example, because they announced Legends of RuneTerra, which is a card game that is relatively close in design to Hearthstone. Now, they wouldn't be the first one to try that, remember Artifact, but I have a feeling that because, again, it's Riot Games, they have a much better chance to find a stable footing with this genre as well, especially since Blizzard's whole issue stems from the Hearthstone community and the competitive scene there, so you might have quite a few competitive players deciding to switch over. Then there's also Project F, which will apparently be some sort of adventure game, some new way to explore the world of League of Legends. Not too much known there. And Project L, which honestly looks super interesting to me, which will be a fighting game. And while that League of Legends fighting game looks super cool so far, and I'm actually very curious about that one because that could shake up the fighting game scene a little bit as well, that one is still quite a while away. One of the people working on that stated that the game is not even close to release or even alpha, so it'll be a long time until we hear anything serious about that. And then they also announced a League of Legends esports manager and a League of Legends anime as well. I for one think this is exciting news because the announcements even for next year look somewhat not that crazy to me so far, especially in the online competitive scene. Of course, there are some other games like Cyberpunk that will look interesting, but I think it's great that we have some more variety. I just hope that HiRez takes the necessary steps to ensure their future in this market as well. That's it for today. If you're new to the channel, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out and it keeps you updated on more HiRez, Smite stuff and maybe also these games in the future. And other than that, thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you all for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.